welcome to the Next Minute podcast, where we'll be exploring the complexity and unpredictability of grief, but with a focus on hope and continuity. I'm your host Sean, a widowed dad of 2 boys, a full-time employee, a volunteer for a men's mental health peer-to-peer support group, so that really leaves little time for anything else, so why not throw in podcast host on top of all those responsibilities as well. So in each episode, we will listen to stories of loss, struggles with grief and mental health, but within those stories, there'll be hope and details of how we've survived and moved forward. Hopefully, our stories can then shine a light on the hope and how we've navigated the variety and complexity of emotions throughout our journey with grief. We'll be aiming to have new episodes every week, so make sure you follow, like and subscribe now and never miss an episode. As the podcast grows, I'll have guests joining me, telling me all about their loved one who they've lost, sharing tales, memories and funny anecdotes along the way. Through sharing the stories, I hope to show that grief isn't linear. We all experience, feel and deal with grief in our own way. So if you're interested in being a guest on the show, you can email us at thenextminutepodcast@outlook.com. The idea being, when we do have guests on, the focus is on their loved one, how they've survived, navigated grief, and any hints and tips they can share with us just to help that next person get through the next minute. So we're now at episode 5. Bit of a milestone for me personally, getting this far, and I would probably say the main lesson I've learned from doing those 4 episodes is that my microphone was upside down, which should now mean that you're getting a better quality podcast going forward. And it would also explain why it sounded like the volume went up about 10 seconds ago as well. Right, we'll crack on with episode 5. So this one will follow it's called the 27th of July, the blog on WordPress, Chronicles of a Super Average Dad. Like I said earlier, what I'll do is I'll just record this as I'm reading it and reacting to it, so you get more of a natural response to sort of what I'm reading through. So this one, for those who don't know, the 27th of July was actually Taylor's funeral. So this one I wrote around the 5th of August, I think, just looking at a published date. And it was the first time I'd wrote anything since the funeral. And I remember thinking I had these big expectations that once the funeral was done, that it would give me some kind of closure and I'd feel different. Not necessarily better, but just in some way I thought I'd get, some kind of acceptance from the funeral and I'd get that, that final send-off kind of thing, but nothing changed. If anything, it got a little worse. Like I mentioned in one of the earlier episodes, that I wasn't ready for that final goodbye. I think in my head I kind of thought when the funeral was done, I would, something would change, like there'd be, a switch just sort of flicked on and then I'd be able to, start healing. And it just wasn't. So I had the funeral and surprisingly it wasn't the hardest day since her passing. I didn't know why. Why wasn't that day the hardest? I think it was because I was with her and I was determined to make it a celebration of her life. I purposely wrote a speech and I titled it Not a Eulogy, just because this wasn't about her death. I wanted it to be about her life. And as funerals go, it was beautiful. We had it at Green Acres and it was just a stunning place to have a funeral. We always had the personalised Disney coffin, the horse and carriage, tributes that people brought, the service and finally the wake. One thing that really, really got me as soon as I saw them was there was about 20 odd nurses from Whiston who'd all, seen to Taylor, whether it was throughout the pregnancies or on the day that she passed. But yeah, there was about 20 nurses lined up, middle of COVID with the masks on, outside the funeral place, all just lined up waiting for us to arrive, and they stayed for the full service. Came and spoke to me after, and that for me was such a beautiful gesture for them to do. There's a couple of glitches on the day though, but nothing that would take away from such a special day either. And I know, even to this day, I know that I did her proud, as did everybody else who was involved as well. It may not have been what she'd pictured for her own funeral. She was somebody who talked about death quite a bit, so kind of had an idea of what to do. Well, no, she would have loved it, if that's the right phrase. So since the funeral, I wrote that I felt very much the same, but I said that anger crept in, but I've already spoke about anger quite a few times throughout these blogs, and I think I always, looking back, memory has always been a bit fuzzy around particularly those first few months, and even now it takes me, I have to really concentrate to kind of pick up on memories from then, and a lot of them are usually just from other people mentioning something that happened around that time, or be reflecting on these blogs that kind of trigger those memories to open up. So it's just really fuzzy at the minute. When I was writing this, so yeah, talked about anger and no idea what I was angry for. Didn't know who to be angry at or what to be angry at, but I just knew that the anger was there and it was really starting to boil. I'd started to look into starting up at the gym or picking up boxing again, something that allowed me just to relieve some of that anger, get some of it out physically. I just kind of mentioned that I can't continue with the anger building up. I've been doing things that are healthy to partly relieve some of the anger, and partly to feel something again. And this next section kind of builds on the anger, and I sort of explain that I do know why I was angry. Well, I'll read it as it was written. So it just says, I'm pissed off. I only got 7 years and 3 months with her. I'm pissed off that she only got 25 years. I'm pissed off Elijah only got 2 years, 1 month with his mum. I'm pissed off that Cora only got 12 hours. I'm pissed off we had 40 plus years stolen from us. I'm pissed off it happened. Pissed off that I can't look at pictures without crying. And I'm pissed off that I can't go for a drive without crying. And I'm just pissed off. I think that was the first time I'd really started to, I don't want to say process the anger, but start to recognise and maybe deal with it in some way. But I was talking about this the other day, which is quite fitting for the episode, but I was literally talking about how I didn't know why I was angry. Well, not that I didn't know why I was angry, but I had nothing to be angry at. In terms of nobody did anything wrong. It couldn't have been foreseen or prevented or anything like that. It was just bad luck. And I think in some senses that kind of made it harder. I didn't have anyone to blame. I didn't have anyone to focus that anger and that energy on. It just happened, and I basically had to deal with it. There was nothing else to do. So I move on and just say for some reason it's worse that we were happy and that we were so happy. So we never argued. Don't get me wrong, with our disagreements, but never like properly argued. Never shouted and screamed or. So I said we didn't have bad words, but I'm probably sure Taylor had a few against me. But yeah, we were just happy. We were really happy. The only consolation that I can take away from the day was that our last words to each other were "I love you," and a couple of texts when I got home. So on my drive to her on that horrible day, I was worried that she hadn't read my last text, and it kind of only clicked when I was driving. So as soon as I pulled up at the hospital, I checked whether I had the 2 blue ticks to confirm that she'd read it, and she had done. And I've still got that saved, took screenshots of it. I can't remember what the time was that she'd read it, but it was early hours. I got about 2 o'clock in the morning in my head. But those last text messages were 11 o'clock. Taylor messaged me just saying, I love you. I messaged her back saying, love you too, princess. And there was home safe and sound. And then I texted her again saying, you were so amazing today. I literally can't believe what you've done. All with only about 20 to 30 minutes of gas and air. You amaze me, the way you handled this pregnancy and that epic birth. I fucking love you so much. You're incredible, and I didn't think I could love you anymore until today. And again, that last part was proven wrong. I talked about it in an earlier episode that you can't really understand how much your love for somebody's amplified when they're gone. But yeah, knowing that she'd read that message, knowing that she'd seen how proud I was of her, which I'm sure she knew anyway, but knowing that she'd read that last message just meant so much to me. And when I talk about the epic birth, for those who don't know the story, I'd taken Taylor for a checkup. Bear in mind, this is obviously middle of COVID. Taken Taylor for just a normal pregnancy checkup. I think she was around 38 weeks maybe. She'd gone in, and she'd come out about an hour later, and they'd told her she was a couple of centimetres dilated and asked her if she wanted to stay in. In true Taylor fashion, she was like, no, going home. So after waiting about an hour and a half for her, went and picked her up. And then on the way home, contractions started to get more and more frequent. So it was a 40-minute drive back. We packed a bag for Elijah, dropped it off at nursery, and then straight back on the motorway down towards Wisdom. And at some points I was certain I was going to have to deliver Cora on the hard shoulder. Luckily we made it, and then in like a fit of panic, I've got Taylor into a little wheelchair, pushing her down the walkway of Wiston, got to the elevators, and again, just pure panic, so I pushed her into the elevator. She's hit the back wall because I didn't stop her before. Got her, went down, moved across to the delivery suite, got in there, and then they asked the Taylor's date of birth, and I give them half of mine and half of Taylor's. I didn't realise until she turned around and looked up at me angry. I was like, oh crap. So quickly sorted that. Got into a room, and then it was literally within 50 minutes of us being there. The nurse came in, and Taylor was asking for an epidural, and the nurse turned around and sort of looked at Taylor, then looked down, and she went, oh. And to set the scene, Taylor was stood up, she was squeezing my hand, and literally as the nurse said, oh, I looked down and saw Coa's head. So the nurse quickly ran over. Luckily, she just put some gloves on, and she literally caught Coa as Taylor gave birth, like right in that second. Perfect timing for the nurse to come in. I would have absolutely panicked if that had happened without her. So yeah, just an epic story. An amazing day. You know, we had, like I said, I call it our perfect goodbye. We had that goodbye in person, and we had the goodbye in text, and a lot of people don't get that. So I do feel lucky that we got to have, you know, those goodbyes. I move on to say the worst part about grief isn't actually the grief. It's missing that person. It's missing those little looks as something stupid would happen on TV. Missing those little touches as you walk past each other. Miss seeing them in the seat. And there's nothing worse than missing them. Now, there are times when I'm with 10 plus people for a gathering at mum and dad's, yet I feel alone. I could be sat in a car full of people laughing and joking, but I still feel alone. Or I could be sat cuddling the kids, which right at that moment was the happiest that I could be, but I'd still feel alone. Strangely, 5 years on, I still get like that. We could be at a family gathering still, or you know, I could have a car full of people, and I'd still feel that way. And I always say the loneliest I felt was actually on Christmas Day. 20 odd of us, mum and dad's. Obviously, everyone's having a great time, laughing, joking. I was involved in it, you know. I had that mask on. Everyone could see me laughing and smiling, but that was just the absolute loneliest I felt. And you know, it was no one's fault. That's just how I felt. And I still get that way. You know, if there's a lot of people together, to be fair, it's usually when I'm with a group of people that I feel my loneliest. Or the only other time where it really gets me is when the house is quiet. You know, the kids have gone to bed. I'm not on the Xbox, or I'm not, you know, talking to someone or whatever. Where I'm genuinely alone, and it hits me then as well. So you kind of get it from two sides. You're either genuinely alone and physically alone, or you just get that impending feeling of just complete loneliness. When you're with a group of people, loneliness is probably one of the biggest things I've battled over the years. Moving on, I sort of write that I'm trying to keep myself busy doing odd jobs. I'm visiting people, getting out for walks, but the reality was that the best I got out of them was just a distraction. It was a distraction from the cyclone of shit that is grief. And as soon as the distractions were over, that cyclone starts again, which, depending on the distraction, could make it feel so much worse. And more often than not, though, the cyclones stay there, maybe in the distance, but it's still there. There's no escape. And that kind of brings back the point I think I made in episode 1, where you've got your grief box, you've got your ball bouncing around, and you've got your little grief button. So your grief's always there, and every now and then it's just going to get hit again. It's going to trigger all those raw emotions. Sometimes you can anticipate it around anniversaries, certain events. It's always there. Sometimes it'll hit randomly, but it's always going to trigger at some point. And I kind of finish this blog just by saying that it feels like a rot has set in. I can keep it at bay most of the time, but every now and then a wall falls down and I have to rebuild it. But it'll never be as strong as the previous wall. And I just kind of end it with, but hopefully it lasts a little while. And I think reading that back is sort of where I'm recognising in myself now that was really where that depression really started to sink in. Probably didn't realise it at the time, or not that I remember, but I think that was, reading back at this, I would see signs now that, I was really struggling and needed someone to talk to. And that's only because I've done certain courses and I've lived through it and I've spoken to so many people who've struggled as well, that I would be able to pick up on those signs. So that is the end of this blog, the 27th of July. Usually what I'll probably do is just do another blog, because this one was quite short, but it was also quite heavy for me, to be honest. Not only that, but today is also Father's Day, and we was away camping with the kids. I was with my brother and his wife, and their kids. We had an amazing time. Sat around a campfire most of the time, so my throat's been quite dry recording this. Which is probably why you might have heard me sort of like gulping and stuff. But yeah, it's been obviously an emotional day. We left the campsite around 12 o'clock maybe. I drove home and I've not really seen anyone. And that was a conscious decision, really. I've not been to see obviously my own dad. Mainly because it's just been a tough day. Wasn't expecting it to be. I kind of thought I'd be alright, but I've struggled. I sort of threw myself into needing to wash and pack away all the camp gear, lay everything away, and I've actually just decided to repack everything ready for the next trip. So the next camping trip should be a lot easier to sort of pack for. But yeah, I kind of just sort of touching on that topic of loneliness I mentioned through this blog. That's kind of how I felt, and I felt that if I did go and see people, it'd just hit me all again, that loneliness. And it kind of hits harder with days like today, especially on Father's Day, because Taylor would always make such a big deal of it. Mentioned earlier that in earlier blogs that she was like the most thoughtful person ever, especially at gift giving, and she would have done something absolutely amazing. And there is a bit of sort of taking a bit of solace from today, because the family have paid for me to go and see Duncan Ferguson, an audience with Duncan Ferguson, later in July, and that's going to be quite probably an emotional one for me as well, because I think it was actually on the 7th of July I got a call, and it was actually Duncan Ferguson, obviously one of my heroes, Everton legend, and was also the first person who asked me about Taylor after she'd died. So my family had reached out. I think my cousin Brian did as well. My couple of my brothers, and they'd reached out to Everton to sort of explain what had happened. And like I said, within 7 days, I'm not sure when they reached out to them. But yeah, 7th of July, Duncan Ferguson rang, and he was the first person to ask about Taylor. And that was the first time I'd kind of opened up and spoken to someone in that kind of way. I think I'd had a couple of calls from like local press earlier, around that time, before I'd spoke with Duncan. But that was the first time that somebody had like a genuine interest in hearing about Taylor rather than hearing about the story. And like that just meant so much. I got so much just from listening to Duncan sort of reacting, asking more and more questions. Like he was genuinely interested in finding more out about her, and the kids as well. And I think that kind of later down the line, when I was speaking with more people who'd lost someone, and it's kind of why I wanted to start this podcast as well, because talking about them helps, and showing that genuine interest in learning and wanting to know about the person who's passed, it helps. And if I can get somebody on the podcast who wants to talk about someone they've loved and lost, and it helps them, it's more than worth it. And like I think I mentioned in the last episode as well, I was speaking with another widow. She lost her husband in June last year, and I was chatting to her, and I asked her about him, what was his name, tell me a little bit about him, and I pointed out to her when we was talking that her face lit up. We was having quite a deep emotional conversation, and then when I asked about her husband, her face lit up. She loved talking about him, and that's really what I want to do with this. I want to sort of normalise that talking about your loved one, or people asking you about your loved one as well. It doesn't have to be a taboo subject. If you've lost someone, then why not, ask them about them, talk about them. It's how we keep the memory alive. It's how we keep them alive. So yeah, I'll make it up to my dad in a couple of days. I've got him his Toblerone here. I'm pretty sure he's not listening, so it's not going to ruin the surprise. I would be surprised if he knew how to work podcast, to be honest. That's coming from somebody who's had a microphone upside down for 4 episodes. But yeah, been a heavy one this. And obviously on an emotional day as well. But there've been a lot of people who've, reached out and made it special. And, I can't thank those enough. On days like this, whether it's a birthday, Father's Day, Mother's Day, whatever kind of event it is, all I'd say is if you are grieving, or someone's grieving, just know that, however you get through that day and process your emotions on that day, as long as they're right for you, then they can't be wrong. So do what I normally do, just close off with a couple of questions. I won't do the what surprised you with grief one, because I think I've pretty much done the main ones for myself, but obviously I don't want to take any ones from any future guests as well. So we'll move on to one of the last questions, which is, what's one of the first things that comes to mind when I think of Taylor? And it would probably be how much she was into like her arts and crafts, especially when we had Elijah. There was always something new that they'd made together. She'd always sign it with TaylorMade as well. Even some Converse that she designed online. We've still got them, and just on the spine of the shoe, I guess, it's got TaylorMade written down the back of it. And yeah, it's one of the things that Elijah still remembers about his mum as well. He loves drawing and doing art, because he says it always reminds him of his mum. So when he has these little moments where he's missing her and he's feeling upset, drawing is one of the things we always go to, because I know it calms him, it helps him with that link to his mum as well. So yeah, arts and crafts is definitely one of the things that comes to mind with Taylor. And the last question, what's one funny story or memory from with them, and it would probably be making pizzas. So we had this grand idea of making our own pizzas. I think it was when she was pregnant with Elijah, and I don't know how we got it so wrong, but we ended up making, we got the ingredients to make just 2 pizzas. I think we both picked which ones we were going to make. We didn't realise how messy it was going to be. It was absolutely covered in flour, and the kitchen was an absolute state. But we just had so much fun doing it. So yeah, we both picked a couple of toppings of what we was going to have on each of our pizzas, and it turns out the amount of dough that we used, I think, made, no exaggeration, about 14 pizzas. It was probably more than that because we just ended up making massive ones in the end because of how much we ended up making. But I think we ended up driving around delivering some to friends and family just to try and get rid of some. But yeah, just anything like that. Like, Taylor loved experimenting in the kitchen, and like, it was weird because like she had this set recipe for spag bol as well, and it was weird because it was one that I'd made for her, and she absolutely loved it, and she got me to repeat it. And like, no matter how many times I repeated it with the exact same ingredients, it was never the same as that first time, and she always made sure that I knew it as well. So that brings an end to episode 5. As always, if you take anything away from this, just know that whatever you're feeling, no matter how alien those feelings may feel, they're normal, and there's plenty of support available. I always recommend the Hub of Hope. It's a great website and an app, and it provides a directory of support. You simply enter your postcode or area that you live in, or wherever you're staying, and whatever you're struggling with, and it'll just return a list of local and nationwide resources available to you as well. You can follow the Next Minute page on Facebook, where there'll be additional content available along with links to the different platforms we're using. And if you've enjoyed the episode, please like, follow, subscribe, comment, and if you feel like someone you may know may benefit from listening, please give us a share as well. So thanks again for joining me. Remember, you can get through the next minute.